Scientists tested the DNA of every empire that ever ruled Mongolia. 6,000 years, 5 empires, 214 ancient genomes pulled from bones buried across 85 sites. And when they lined up all that ancient DNA against the people living in Mongolia right now, only one empire matched. Not the first, not the most famous, not the one you are thinking of. And the reason only one match did not just rewrite Mongolian history, it broke the entire idea of what it means to come from a place. Because the empire that matched did not inherit Mongolia's people, it replaced them. If you think you know where Mongolians come from, you are almost certainly wrong, and by the end of this video you will understand why most origin stories people tell themselves are dead wrong too. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell, because what this data reveals about ancestry will change how you think about your own. The Mongolian steppe stretches for 2,500 kilometers of open grassland. It has produced more empires than any other landscape on Earth. Xiongnu, Turkic, Uyghur, Mongol, all of them lived and died on the same stretch of ground. In a Bronze Age burial mound in central Mongolia, archaeologists lifted out a bone fragment roughly 4,000 years old. That single fragment was one of 214 ancient genomes a team of geneticists eventually sequenced. Together, they cover 6,000 years of human life on the steppe. It is one of the largest ancient DNA datasets ever assembled for a single region. You would assume the people living on this steppe today are the descendants of everyone who ever ruled it. They are not. When scientists lined up the DNA of living Mongolians against every empire that had ever held that land, only one matched. And the reason only one matched changes what we thought we knew about how a people is made. The narrow question is simple to state. Which of the great empires of the eastern steppe actually left its genes in the people living there now? Not their monuments, not their language, not their weapons. Their DNA. Because when the match finally came back, it did not just answer who, it broke the entire idea of what it means to come from a place. Think about what that means for you. If a population can be swapped out from under itself while staying on the same land, then geography is not ancestry. The map your family tells itself is not the map your body carries. Most origin stories people tell themselves are wrong, and this study is one of the clearest reasons why. There is a second thing hidden in this data, something nobody predicted about the empire that finally matched. Hold on to that. It matters more than the answer itself. The first popular answer is the obvious one. Mongolians descend from the Xiongnu. The Xiongnu ran the first nomadic empire on this land, from about 209 BCE to 100 CE. Same steppe, same horses, same lifestyle. The story writes itself. The DNA refuses to write it. When a separate team looked at 18 Xiongnu individuals from aristocratic and local elite cemeteries and published the results in Science Advances in April 2023, they found what they called extreme levels of genetic diversity. Diversity so wide, it existed inside single extended families at the same burial site. At those elite cemeteries, the lowest status individuals carried the widest range of ancestry. At the bottom of Xiongnu society was a population that had come from every corner of Eurasia. That is not one people. That is a coalition. Second answer. Same land, same people. 6,000 years on one stretch of grass has to mean continuity. The eastern steppe saw at least 5 major genetic turnovers in those 6,000 years. Living on the same grassland did not mean carrying the same DNA. Consider one example. Around 3000 BCE, Western steppe pastoralists, called the Afanasyevo, migrated into Mongolia and brought dairy herding with them. In Europe, that same wave of steppe migrants replaced up to 75% of local ancestry in some regions. In Mongolia, they left almost none. Same migrants. Opposite outcome. Third answer. Modern Mongolians are a smooth blend of every empire that ever ruled them. The blending model predicts a gradual average across time. The DNA shows a cliff, not a slope. Whatever produced the modern Mongolian gene pool was not a slow mixing over centuries. It arrived fast, and it arrived late. The study that broke the puzzle came out in November 2020. It ran in the journal Cell, Volume 183, Issue 4. The lead authors were Chengwan Zheng and Christina Warrener. The international team pulled together researchers from the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History in Jena, Germany, from Seoul National University, and from the National University of Mongolia. The title tells you the scope: a dynamic 6,000-year genetic history of Eurasia's eastern steppe. The scale is what makes it decisive. 214 new genome-wide ancient DNA datasets, drawn from 85 archaeological sites in Mongolia and 3 in Russia. Add in 19 previously published Bronze Age genomes from northern Mongolia. The time span runs from about 4,600 BCE to 1400 CE. 6,000 years of human life on one steppe. The method, in plain language. The team extracted DNA from bones and teeth, pulled from those burial sites. They sequenced genome-wide data for each individual. Then they compared every ancient profile against modern reference populations and against each other across time periods, using a statistical tool called QPAD-made admixture modeling. That tool decomposes each person's ancestry into source populations. If your DNA is 30% one thing and 70% another, QPADM will tell you. Why nobody had solved this before is straightforward. Ancient DNA studies had been pouring out for a decade, but almost all of them focused on the Western Eurasian steppe: Ukraine, Russia, Kazakhstan. The Eastern steppe, Mongolia itself, was a blind spot. Nobody had sequenced enough ancient Mongolian genomes across enough time periods to actually track how the population changed. Now they had, and a second, tighter study published in Science Advances in April 2023 added 18 Xiongnu genomes from elite cemeteries on the empire's western frontier. 2 independent datasets. One question. Here is where the data turns strange. Before any empire, before writing, before recorded politics on this steppe, Mongolia, by the late Bronze Age, was already home not to one people, but to 3. 3 genetically distinct groups, one in the west, one in the north, one in south-central Mongolia, each with its own ancestry profile, each recognizably different from the others in the DNA. This is somewhere between roughly 1200 and 700 BCE, well before the first Xiongnu rider ever pulled a bow. Not one of those 3 groups matches modern Mongolians. There is something else in the bones. All 3 of those Bronze Age populations lived on dairy, cattle, sheep, goats. A team led by Shevin Wilkin, publishing in Nature Ecology and Evolution in 2020, pulled milk proteins straight out of the calcified plaque on their teeth, direct chemical evidence of milk in the mouth. And yet when Zheng's team screened those same individuals for the lactase persistence mutation, the gene that lets you digest milk sugar as an adult, they found none. Not a rare copy. 0. A civilization built on milk, run by people who genetically could not drink it. Now hold that against Europe. Around 3000 BCE, when Western steppe pastoralists called the Yamnaya swept west, they replaced up to 75% of local ancestry in parts of northern Europe. Their close cousins, the Afanasyevo, swept east into Mongolia at the same time, carrying the same dairy culture. In Mongolia, they left almost none of their DNA behind. Same migrants, same century, opposite genetic footprint, 3 separate peoples, sharing a lifestyle but not a bloodline, and none of them are your ancestors if you are Mongolian today. Which raises the question of whether the first empire to unite them changed that at all. The Xiongnu did unite them. Between roughly 209 BCE and 100 CE, the first nomadic empire on the steppe pulled the 3 Bronze Age populations into a single political system. The genetic evidence shows they pulled them into a single gene pool as well. Xiongnu individuals carry ancestry from all 3 earlier groups, mixed with new inflows from Siberia, from the Han Chinese heartland, and from Central Asia further west. The problem is what that mix looks like. The Science Advances team that sequenced 18 Xiongnu individuals from elite cemeteries in April 2023 found something remarkable. Within a single burial site, Individuals ranged from predominantly East Asian on one end of the genetic map to predominantly Western Eurasian on the other. Even inside extended families, brothers and cousins carried different continental ancestry proportions. The researchers wrote that the diversity inside those single families was comparable to the diversity of the empire as a whole, an empire whose single families looked like a map of Eurasia. The pattern got sharper when they sorted by social class. Higher status individuals, the aristocracy, carried less genetic diversity and clustered toward the Eastern Eurasian side. Lower status individuals carried the most diversity, drawn from everywhere. The genetic hierarchy mirrored the social one, top to bottom. For nearly 3 centuries, this coalition ran a state that stretched from northern China to southern Siberia to the edges of Central Asia. On any map, they look like the obvious ancestors of modern Mongolians. They are not. Their signature does not persist. The first empire built a genetic mosaic no modern population resembles. But the empires that came next, the Turks, the Uyghurs, inherited that same land. Whether they inherited those genes is a separate question. The Xiongnu Empire collapsed around 100 CE. What followed was not one successor but a chain of them. The Xianbei, from about 100 to 250 CE. The Rouran, from roughly 300 to 550. The Turkic Khaganate, from 552 to 742. Then the Uyghur Empire, from 744 to 840. Nearly 700 years of successive nomadic states on the same grassland. Zhang's team tracked every one of them. Through the Turkic and Uyghur periods, they wrote, the population maintained high genetic heterogeneity and diversity. Different phrasing, same picture. Still a mosaic. Still no convergence toward the modern Mongolian profile. Something more surprising showed up when they looked at direction. Western Eurasian ancestry did not fade during the early medieval period. In parts of that window, it actually increased. If modern Mongolians had formed by slow drift out of these populations, the drift was pointed the wrong way. The DNA of the steppe was moving further from its modern endpoint, not closer. There is one more piece in these genomes. Turkic and Uyghur individuals still carried substantial ancient North Eurasian ancestry. That component, abbreviated ANE, is an ancient population signature present on the steppe since long before writing. Modern Mongolians carry almost none of it. 2 numbers make the point. From roughly 4,600 BCE to 840 CE, more than 5,000 years ANE ancestry stayed present across every population sampled. In modern Mongolians, it is essentially gone. The old signature was still there through the Uyghur period. Something had to erase it. 5,000 years of empires, and not one of them produced the DNA that Mongolians carry today. Which means the answer has to sit in the last empire standing. And what happened in those final centuries is something nobody predicted. The Uyghur Empire fell in 840 CE. What came next, over the following 4 centuries, is a genetic event with no earlier precedent on this steppe. Eastern Eurasian ancestry surged. ANE ancestry nearly vanished. For the first time in 6,000 years of sampling, the individuals buried in Mongolian ground start to look like the people walking on Mongolian ground now. Late medieval individuals, spanning the rise of the Khitan, the Jurchen, and finally the Mongol Empire in the 13th century, are the only ancient population from the region that genetically resembles present-day Mongolic-speaking peoples. The admixture model puts the numbers on it. Mongol-era individuals carry only 15 to 18% Western steppe ancestry, down from far higher levels in every prior era. 55 to 64% of their ancestry traces to an earlier Eastern Mongolian source called Ulanzuk slab grave. 21 to 27% is Han-related. 3 sources, tight bounds, and it fits. Out of 61 Mongol-era individuals tested against that 3-source model, 56 were an adequate statistical fit. The Xiongnu had scattered across the genetic map. Mongol-era individuals cluster tightly together. Homogeneous. Where the Xiongnu were a mosaic, the opposite pattern from every empire before them. Jiang and Warrener's team stated it plainly in the paper. The Mongol period, they wrote, marks the beginning of the formation of the modern Mongolian gene pool. There is one more detail worth holding. The surge in Eastern Eurasian ancestry during this window was not carried equally by both sexes. It came in more strongly through male ancestors than female. That is a sex-biased migration signature. The DNA of conquest, not of quiet demographic drift. One empire out of all of them matched. And that raises the harder question. Where did the Mongol Empire's own people come from? Everything converges on one window. The centuries between the Uyghur collapse around 840 CE and the Hittite, ancient North Eurasian ancestry, present on this steppe since prehistory, gone. Western Eurasian admixture, the defining feature of every prior empire, suppressed to 15 to 18%. A new profile, dominated by Eastern Eurasian ancestry, appears and then stays. This is the turn. The Mongol Empire is the only match, but not because it preserved what came before, because it erased it. Modern Mongolian DNA matches only the Mongol Empire. Out of every population that ever lived on this steppe, Bronze Age herders, Xiongnu warriors, Turkic khaganates, Uyghur rulers, only the late medieval Mongol-era population carries the genetic profile that persists in Mongolia today. Jiang and Warrener's team put it in the paper directly. By the end of the Mongol period, they wrote, the genetic makeup of the eastern steppe had dramatically changed, retaining little of the ANE ancestry that had been a prominent feature during its prehistory. 6,000 years of sampling, one matching window. The modern Mongolian gene pool was born in the 13th century, not in the Bronze Age, not with the Xiongnu, not in some deep, unbroken lineage running back to the origin of the steppe. When scientists compared Mongolian DNA to every ancient empire that ever ruled this steppe, only one matched. The Mongol Empire, not the first empire, the last one, now the harder piece. Most people, hearing that answer, will assemble it in their heads the natural way. An ancient Mongol people existed on the steppe, waited, grew, and eventually took power under Genghis Khan. The DNA does not say that. The DNA says something different. The Mongol Empire did not inherit Mongolia's genetic identity, it manufactured it. The population that carries modern Mongolian DNA was not sitting on the steppe waiting to be led. It was moving in. The Mongolic-speaking and Tungusic-speaking groups whose ancestry dominates present-day Mongolians expanded from the northeast during the same centuries that produced the Khitan, the Jurchen, and finally the Mongol Empire itself. The empire's rise and the population's arrival are the same event. And the arrival was not symmetrical. The Eastern Eurasian ancestry that surged into the steppe during this window came in more strongly through male lines than female. That is the fingerprint of conquest. Men moving, taking, holding, not families migrating together. Not slow demographic drift, a directional flow with a gender signature. Now hold two pictures side by side. Before the Mongol Empire, every state on this steppe was defined by internal diversity. Xiongnu families with brothers on opposite ends of the genetic map. Turkic and Uyghur populations still carrying the ancient North Eurasian signature from prehistory, a mosaic in every direction you looked. After the Mongol period, that mosaic is gone. Mongol-era individuals cluster tightly. They look genetically alike. For the first time in 6,000 years, the people of this steppe are homogeneous. The empire that unified the largest contiguous land area in human history, 24 million square kilometers, an area about the size of the African continent, was also a genetic founding event. It did not just conquer territory. It replaced the population that lived on it. We think of empires as something a people builds. The Mongol Empire was something that built a people. What we now call Mongolian DNA did not exist before that empire. The empire came first. The people came with it. There is a separate line of evidence that lands on the same window from a completely different direction. In 2003, a team led by Tatiana Zerjal published a paper called The Genetic Legacy of the Mongols in the American Journal of Human Genetics. They looked at the Y chromosome, the piece of DNA passed only from father to son. They found a specific lineage, called the C3 star cluster, present in roughly 8% of men across a region stretching from the Pacific coast of China to the Caspian Sea. Two numbers: 8% of men in that region, roughly half of 1% of all men alive on Earth. At the time, that worked out to approximately 16 million living men descended patrilineally from one source. Based on the mutation rate, the lineage originated in Mongolia about 1,000 years ago. The candidate everyone reached for was Genghis Khan and his close patrilineal male relatives. That interpretation has just been complicated. In February 2026, Aykin Askapuli and colleagues published ancient DNA from Golden Horde elite burials in the Ulitau region of Kazakhstan in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. The mausoleums are linked in Kazakh oral tradition to descendants of Genghis Khan's eldest son, Jochi. 3 of the men sequenced shared the C3 star haplogroup, but it was